Thank you for joining us today at Stuff and Such. Glad to have you. For anyone new to the channel, welcome. Feel free to look through our playlists of audiobooks and perhaps you'll find something that you enjoy. We'll be starting one of the Hardy Boy books. The title is What Happened at Midnight by Franklin W. Dixon. Chapter 1. What an assignment, and from our own dad. Joe Hardy grinned at his brother Frank as the two boys slipped into the ripple-soled shoes and put on dark jackets. First time we ever been asked to play burglar, Frank answered with a chuckle. A few days before, their father, an ace detective, and Malcolm Wright, an inventor, had left for California to hunt for Wright's valuable stolen antique plane. Because they would be delayed in the returning, the inventor had requested the brothers to break into his home and retrieve a top-secret invention before the thieves took it. A little two-story work around midnight, huh? Joe mused. And all because Mr. Wright left his keys inside the house and locked everything but that one bedroom window with the broken lock. Well, the invention must be something super, or Dad or Mr. Wright wouldn't have asked us to guard it with our lives, Frank remarked. I wonder what it is. Well, Dad gave us permission to find out. Say, suppose we can't locate that secret compartment we think is in Mr. Wright's desk before those thieves arrive? Joe asked. I wish Dad could have given us all the details before the call was cut off and we couldn't get it back again. Joe, who had blonde hair, was a year younger than his dark-haired 18-year-old brother Frank. Both had solved many mysteries, some of them for their father. Fenton Hardy had told the boys on the telephone that just before Mr. Wright had left for Bayport, where they all lived, he had been threatened by a mysterious gang. They had learned about the invention from a worker in a factory that had made some of the parts. He had breached the confidence that was placed in him. The caller had told Mr. Wright that if he did not voluntarily turn over his invention before a certain time, visitors would come for it. The date they had set was the following day. Mr. Wright wouldn't have had time to put the invention into a safety deposit box, so he must have hid it in his study, Fenton Hardy had said. He's afraid the thieves might break into his house, so he had alerted the police to be there tomorrow morning, but he's still worried and he wants you boys to get the small box containing the invention before then. Don't leave it at our house when you're not there. Keep it with you at all times, but make sure it's all well hidden. Frank and Joe relayed the conversation to their pretty, understanding mother, and to Aunt Gertrude, their father's maiden sister who lived with them. She was inclined to be critical of her nephew's involvement in the detective work. Instantly she said, Be burglars, the idea! Why, suppose you fall off that house? Gertrude, please, Mrs. Hardy broke in. Don't even mention such a possibility. I know the boys will be careful. But of course, said Joe. Come on, let's go, Frank. The brothers hurried to their garage where their shiny convertible gleamed in the light of a street lamp on the corner of High and Elm Street. Frank took the wheel and drove it to within a block of Mr. Wright's rambling old-fashioned house. The boys walked to it and were glad to see that the building stood in deep shadows. They reconnoitered around the building in silence. No one was around. Finally Frank whispered, Well, I guess our best bet to the second floor is the trellis. It looks sturdy. We'll go across the roof over to the kitchen door and edge around to the unlocked window. I'll stay close by and hold your legs until you make it, Joe answered. They followed each other up the trellis and crossed the narrow roof. Fortunately, there wasn't much pitch to it, so Joe crouched and grasped his brother's right leg. All right, he announced in a whisper. Frank stretched over to the window ledge, but could not reach the top of the sash to raise it. Give me a push upwards, he murmured to Joe, who hoisted his brother until his fingers could reach the top of the sash. The window lifted easily, and Joe pulled himself sideways through it. Well, it's your turn, Joe. He reached out and grasped his brother's outstretched hands. Joe, being a little shorter than Frank, found he could not reach the window without swinging precariously in space. If Frank couldn't hold his brother's weight, he would be dragged outside, and then both of the boys would plunge to the ground. Well, no use being silly about this, Frank said. I'll just come around to the rear door and open it up for you. Joe was about to climb down the trellis when a strong light suddenly lit the area. A car! Frank exclaimed as the driver beamed a searchlight on their side of the street. Maybe it's the thieves. Get down! Frank quickly closed the window while Joe flattened himself face down upon the roof. He did not stand up until the area was in darkness again, and then he hurried down the trellis and through the rear door. That was a close call, said Frank. Joe nodded. I thought maybe it was a police car, but I guess not. It didn't seem to have a revolving top light. His brother agreed. Well, I'm sure Mr. Wright's enemies are casing this place. Yeah, and I'll bet they'll be back soon. We best be getting moving. Holding their flashlights low to the floor, the boys sped up the stairs and found Mr. Wright's study. A large walnut desk stood in the center of the room. Frank and Joe walked to the front of it, where there were drawers to the left and right of the wide keyhole. The top secret compartment must be in one of them, Joe suggested. They don't seem to be locked, Frank whispered in amazement. The boys searched diligently, lifting aside letters and other papers, but they found nothing. Now what? Joe asked. Frank had an idea. I'll look in the knee-hole while you hunt for movable panels on the outside of the desk. Again there was silence as the two boys began to finger the woodwork. Minutes went by, and then Joe said, I think I found something that moves. Frank crawled around and watched as his brother slid open a panel, revealing a long, narrow space. Was anything in it? Joe beamed his flashlight inside. A look of disappointment came over his face. Nothing. There might have been here something at one time. You mean the invention? Maybe. How do you make it out? Something in that knee-hole looks suspicious, Frank answered. Just then the boys heard the crash of glass and immediately clicked off their flashlights. Someone had broken a window pane and at this moment had no doubt reached inside for the lock. Any minute, one or more men might be mounting those stairs and entering the study. The boys looked for a hiding place. There was no draperies or sofa or large chairs and no closet. Come on, let's hide in the knee-hole, Frank whispered, and then we'll just use our hand signals. Sometime before this, the Hardys had devised a series of hand-squeezed signals. One hard squeeze means let's attack, and two meaning caution. Long, short, long meant we'd better scram, and an ordinary handshake was agreed. If there aren't more than two men, let's attack 'em, Joe said in a barely audible tone. Okay. Quickly the two crawled into the knee-hole and pulled the desk chair into place. The boys were well hidden when they heard the footsteps on the stairs and then voices. No failing this time, or Shorty'll take us on our last ride, said a man in a nasal voice. Frank and Joe wondered if the men had tried to break in earlier, but failed. The man's companions spoke in lower tones of disgust. Oh, you'll believe Shorty invented fire if he told you he did. He ain't so great. Takes orders from the boss, don't he? The other didn't reply. The two men entered the room and beamed flashlights about. Where did Wright say he kept the invention? The low, deep-toned man asked. I got in late on the conversation when I tapped that phone call to the Hardy house, the other answered, but I did hear the word secret compartment. Where would that be, in the desk, maybe? Frank and Joe froze. Were they about to be discovered? No, not the desk, the other man said. The safe. For the first time, the boys noticed a small safe standing against the room that was opposite of them. Frank and Joe were fearful the men would detect their hiding place, but the attentions of the burglars were focused on the safe. In a moment, they squatted, and the boys got a good glimpse of their faces. Both were swarthy and hard-looking. And at that moment, the tower clock of the town began to chime. It was midnight. The men waited until the echo of the 12th stroke had died away. Then the one with the nasal twang put his ear to the dial of the safe and began turning the knob. After a few moments, his companion asked impatiently, "What's the matter? That safe-cracking ear of yours turned to tin?" "Seems the tumblers are noiseless," the other said. "Guess we'll just have to blow it out." He began to take some wire from his pocket. Frank and Joe were trapped. If the door of the safe was blown off, it might head right in their direction. Quickly, Joe felt for Frank's hand and gave it a hard squeeze, meaning, "Let's attack." Instantly, Frank answered with the agreed handshake. In a flash, Joe flung the desk chair at the two men, and then the boys jumped them. End of chapter 1.